everyone and welcome to Knit with Hannah. I'm Hannah and I'm here with Knitting Natter to help you learn to knit the easy way. What we're looking at today is repairing a seam or, it's actually undoing a seam. How can you undo a seam once you've finished your hat, once you've finished knitting and you've sewn up the seam and then you realise maybe the hat is too long, maybe the hat is too short, maybe you want to fix one of the stripes if it's too fat against the others. It will happen maybe a couple of times in your knitting journey that you just have a seam and it all goes wrong. So we're going to look at it today with these two baby hats. I have a pair of scissors here. They only come out once you know what you're doing, so don't start cutting yet. But what I do have here is my fat tapestry needle that I use for sewing up seams. So I'm going to get that out and we can start with that. So I'm going to start with this striped one because it's a lot easier to determine where the seam is. If you look at the top, it's purple at the top. So I've used the purple yarn that came right out of the top here to sew all the way down the seam. And you will see just very gently, if you tease this open, because I've used an invisible seam method, that there is a little bit of purple thread sitting through there. And you can see that on the other side as well. Just if you tease it apart gently, there it is. Now, as I pull that, you can feel it, I can feel it, pulling from there and pulling from there. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to gently tease that out, and I am now going to cut it. Because I know it's not part of the knitting, it's not going around and around, it is part of the seam because it's pulling there and it's pulling there. So I'm going to let that unravel. There we go. That yarn is just going to pull down here, one stitch at a time, and that's as simple as it gets. Now, if the only issue is you have to mend something at the top here, once you've got so far with this, you can actually leave these strands here and let yourself, because that is basically just securing the last bit of the seam here. So you could just leave that to a point, but I'm going to unravel the whole thing. It's just a case of gently teasing out these stitches one at a time. Don't worry, all of this isn't going to unravel because I've just snipped that. All I did was cut the purple one. All I did was cut the purple yarn. And these other bits are just the leftover strands from when I started the stripes when I was knitting. There's going to be a grey thread that I started knitting with, and this lime green as well. And of course the purple from the cast on edge. So we're likely to have 4 threads. We're going to have the one that's coming from the top, that is the stitches that's holding the seam together. Then there's going to be the purple from the cast on. There's going to be the grey from the grey stripe and the lime green from that stripe too. So just be gentle, just be careful, one stitch at a time. And with all of these, it's just feeling that this little strand is actually going down the seam rather than along the stitches. Yes, take your time, one little piece at a time. I'm going to sit here and unravel this end bit, and then I'll see you when we get back to the top. Okay, so I've unravelled all the way down here, and you can see that there's the end of the silver. The lime is actually still woven in to the seam there it is. And once I get to the top, if I need to unravel and maybe add length or take length away before the shaping, all I have to do is then come down the seam again, and I will have a different colour up here maybe that I'm creating the seam with, but I can just tie in those ends again when I get to the end. And it won't be a problem. All I have to do is just keep going up here. You can see very clearly which bit is the seam here. I can just pull those little bits of purple out. The only bit you have to be careful with, and it shouldn't be a problem, is when you get to the purple, you just have to just give it a little bit of a tug, open the seam up a bit, and there it is. That's that purple that's coming from the seam thread. Where is it? There it is. Just open it up and you'll see where the thread goes next. There you are. Now it's the same thing with this. I'm not going to unravel this one because I've sewn the leaves on the top afterwards. But what you're going to do is just pull this seam apart just gently, and you're going to investigate these threads in here. What are they? Where are they coming from? And you can see that there's a lot sitting here in this seam. I'm just going to open it up under here with my other finger. Open up that seam. You can see there's two sides of it there. I'll hold that there. And which thread is part of the knitting and which threads are actually sewing the seam. So this thread here, I can see is going into that stitch. As I tug it, that stitch is tightening up. Just loosen that one again so it's even. And then as I go into the seam here with my finger underneath it, what's this? Is that part of the seam? No, that's tightening that stitch on the left. So it's just a bit of investigation. It's a bit of detective work really. What is which? Which thread is coming from the seam and which thread? Oh, look at that. There we go. We can see that if I pull that, the seam is tightening all the way down here. And if I pull that the other direction, the seam is tightening all the way up there. So this seam is not going horizontally. This thread is not going horizontally. It's not part of the stitches. It's part of the seam. So if I was needing to undo this seam, that's where I would go. That's what I would cut. And I would go up here if I needed to lengthen the body before I do the shaping. I would unravel all the way down to the base of the shaping and start knitting again. And then at some point I'd obviously have to use a new piece of thread. I'd have to start using the yarn ball again, carry on, continue until I need to do the shaping, and then I'd have a longer piece of thread to start sew the seam up again. If I was in need of shortening it, then all I'd have to do is unravel it, take it down maybe an inch below the shaping, start shaping again, go all the way up, and I'd have a long piece of thread to sew the seam up again. So having cut this, it won't be a problem. Okay, so I'm just going to pull that tight again. There you go. So we did the investigation. We worked out which thread was part of the stitches and which thread was part of the seam. There you go. That's all you have to do. Being brave, just doing the investigation, taking all the steps, making sure that you've got the right thread, getting your scissors ready, and then when you know it's part of the seam because it's getting tight towards the base and it's getting tight towards the top, then you can use your scissors. But don't just go in there and go, that's a bit of the seam, I'll chop it. I've made that mistake myself before, and only when I was just doing a bit more detective work and working out how I can establish which one's which have I actually got to a point where I'm happy doing this. I'm quite happy I'm doing a seam now. So I do hope that helps. Then if you like these baby hats, then maybe you'll go over to my website and have a look. This is a very autumnal one. It's looking like a pumpkin, but you can make it any time of year really. Just make an apple, or you could even make it part of the petals of a flower even. So the bottom bit's green and the leaves are more petals so that they're yellow like a daffodil perhaps. But you just be creative with it. So we have the striped baby beanie and we have the pumpkin baby beanie, and they're both on my website, so do go and have a look, knitwithhannah.co.uk. Right, well I do hope I'll see you again soon, and I do hope you very rarely have to resort to this method, but I'm sure we'll all come across it at some point. If you don't want to start again, start your knitting again and abandon your attach completely, then you have that rescue option. Great. I hope you'll join me again soon. Thanks very much for being here. Over on knitwithhannah.co.uk, you'll find these patterns. Bye for now. Happy knitting.